Professor Rodney Whitaker, how are you doing today?
Doing good, Shawn Thunder Wallace. No, excuse me, Dr. Shawn Thunder Wallace.
I think uh, the first time we met and we played together was on a cable access show in Detroit. Um, and I think you would have been about 18 or 19, and I was 9.
What year was that? I think I'm maybe a little. How old are you now?
So I'm 45.
And I'm 52.
All right, so if I was 9, then you would have been 17, if
No,
my
I think
math
it
is.
was late. I think it was a little couple years later than that.
It was later than that?
So I think I was like 20 or 21 when I met.
Okay. All right.
Because I met you, you were like 14 or 15 or something like that.
No, I have footage. I have footage. There's a video in '83. It was on a cable access show, and we're playing Moments Notice.
Yeah, I thought that was maybe that because I didn't. That was Francisco's playing. I met him in 1985. So I think it was maybe a couple years later.
So we met a long time ago.
Yep.
and we played together in a couple groups. I think we played together in uh, Roy Brooks and Artistic Truth,
Yep.
and then I had a couple records out, and you played on a couple of those,
Yep.
and playing with you and and a lot of the folks that we played with in Detroit was very formative for me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
You
and
you you were young Sonny Stitt.
yeah, yeah, Sonny Stitt. That my two influences, Sonny Stitt and John Coltrane. And back in those days, it was all Stitt.
Oh yeah.
It was
Yeah.
all Sonny
I,
Stitt.
I was I was I was pretty impressed. I knew a lot of impressive young players, but I was especially impressed with your ability at that age. Whether you were 9 or 14, you were playing.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So, Rodney, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from? Of course, I know where you're from, but we're talking to a wider audience, and uh, where you grew up, and what your childhood was like.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rodney Whitaker, of course, and I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, from the east side of Detroit, the deep east side. And my father worked at Chrysler Motor Company, and my mother was a housewife. And I grew up in a community in Detroit where mostly, probably 80, 90% of the people were transplants from the South. All of the parents in the community was Southern. Everybody went to church on Sunday, and there was a mother and father in every household. So it was kind of a different existence than the way folks live now or grow up now. And everyone in that community was your parent. And I knew Southern accents based on you know how my friends talk. We all kind of talk Southern and ate Southern food and had that listen to gospel music and it was a great place to grow up. People think of Detroit as sort of a negative place, maybe when I grew up, but for me it was beautiful. It was a beautiful upbringing, and I'm a product of Detroit Public Schools. I actually started playing music when I was 7. Started playing violin and switched to bass at 13 years old, and maybe in 8th grade. And when I first started playing bass at 13, that's when folks in my community turned me on to jazz, because people would see me with a bass and they's like, "Do you know Ron Carter? Do you know Paul Chambers? You should listen to Miles. You should listen to Coltrane." So it was a community that nurtured you musically, and we had a lot of jazz in the schools. People like Marcus Belgrave and Donald Walden and Kenny Cox and all those folks there was a program called Omni Arts and Education that brought jazz into the school. So I first really, the jazz bug bit me when I was a teenager, and I spent every waking moment doing that, and I studied, had opportunity because of DSO, Detroit Symphony Orchestra, had a training program. I received free lessons from symphony members, and so so really my education was really K through 1 year of college was really my education. I learned how to write, arrange, and I got to college, and I felt like at that particular time there wasn't a program that was really teaching what I needed to know. So I quit school after 1 year, after 1 year of college, and really started trying to hone my craft as a jazz musician, and did a lot of reading. I was one of those kids that was really into books, and I would ask my mentors, people like Kenny Cox, what should I be reading? And they gave me a reading list, and I actually did the reading. And so that was really my education. And from there, between, I think about growing up, man, like I just described my week. I had every band class. I had 4 or 5 band classes a day. And then I'd go home and practice 3 or 4 hours a day and read and do my homework. And then when I got, I would get mentored by Kenny Cox and people like that. Every Friday I met with Kenny Cox at his house in 12th grade, playing with people like Marcus Belgrave. And I started playing with Donald Walden when I was 18, my first year of college. And that was really, those experiences was my education, because all of those people, they were a repository of information, and they would tell me things. You should be working on this. You should be listening to this. And I actually did what they said. I listened to my elders. And then one last person is a lady named Alma Smith, who was an amazing pianist and vocalist. And Herbie Williams, who was my mentor in high school, also was her boyfriend. And they schooled me on, learning standards, learning how to put money together. And so that's really my education is the education of the streets, so to speak. But they taught me well. I had great teachers.
Yeah. So what was it about music? What was it
Well,
about music?
well, my mother told me when I was a kid, I had discovered music really like at 2 or 3 years old. I learned how to operate we had they used to call it component set. We had a big like stereo that looked like furniture. It looked
Yeah.
like an Etagere or something, and it had a turntable in it and an 8-track in it. And that was my first instrument. I was in love with it, and we had records by Sam Cooke and Curtis Mayfield and things like that. And my mother said, I always loved music that sounded like jazz. Anything that had solos in it, James Brown's band with Maceo Parker. And but I had an unusual life upbringing. In my house, my father liked the blues and my mother liked country music. So that kind of like opened up my mind to exploring every genre of music. And I would read the liner notes. I think I learned how to read so I can read what the liner notes said. So music, I don't know what it is, but it's something in it that I gravitated towards at about 2 years old. And I would always play air guitar or air bass or air saxophone. I just wanted to be a musician. And then at 7, in summer school, they had asked students, they said, we only accepting people who has playing experience. And I lied to get into the music class. And the teacher discovered that I didn't play music, but something about my zest and my love for music, he accepted me in the class anyway.
Yeah. I also feel like music chose me. Like it was just something that was around when I grew up, and I never, there was no time that I wanted to do anything else but play music. Um,
I think I agree with you. I think that it chooses you. You don't choose it, and I think that it has provided me a life. I've traveled around the world. I actually have been to Japan 100 times. Europe
Yeah.
over 200 times. So it opened up a whole world of possibilities. And it did that for me when I was young because, like I said, I would immerse myself in the liner notes, reading about the life of these musicians and how they traveled and where they started. And it made me interested in history. I was always good at history, primarily because of music. Anything that had, like, I remember being in physics class, and when we started studying acoustics and property of strings and things like that, I excelled in the class because it really like related to music. If you can relate, I can understand anything if you can relate it to music.
Yeah. So you said that you've done quite a bit of traveling and touring. Um, what projects have you worked on? Bands have you played in, and which were your favorite and why?
Well, my favorite, I have so many favorites. It's very difficult to kind of choose, but I would say my favorite project or person that I ever worked with was Roy Hargrove.
Hmm.
And I played with Roy Hargrove for about 4 years, toured all over the world with him. In fact, his third or fourth record called Of Kindred Souls, I wrote half the tunes. And I think I love playing with Roy Hargrove primarily because he was the most collaborative musician that I ever met. He was very interested in what you were writing, what you were thinking, and what you felt. And he was young. I'm older. I'm maybe like two couple years older than he was. But he was always like, "What you writing? What you shedding on?" If he heard you in your room practicing, he would knock on your door and want to practice with you. I remember listening to Ornette Coleman, and he wasn't really hip to Ornette. And said, "Man, how do you play like this? What is he thinking about?" And we shared it like one afternoon. We practiced one afternoon on Ornette's concept. So he was probably the most collaborative. And I think people are now finally catching up. Like I look at somebody like Wynton Marsalis, who I've worked with, and I enjoy playing with him, who is way more collaborative now. Not a negative thing than he was when I was playing. Now the cats in the band are the music director for concerts and writing tunes and things like that. Well, Roy started off like that as a kid. Like when I started playing when he was like 19, and he was already, collaborating with cats and musicians, and so that was probably the best experience. And then also for me, with him, I got to play a lot because we would tour, 2, 3 months at a time. Remember, we did the first long tour I ever did was with Roy. We went to Europe and Japan for 3 months.
Hmm.
Summer of 1992. We were out for 3 months. Drove
Yeah.
me mad.
So, uh, okay, so we're talking about you brought up Kenny Cox
Oh yeah.
and uh, what musicians have been inspirational to you in your work? In particular, who do you feel like you draw from as far as your bass playing and maybe as far as the kind of composition that you hear?
Well, from a bass player standpoint, I have the influences have grown over the years just because I know more about jazz than I ever did before. But as a kid, it was really, really three people, and it was they're all Detroiters. It was the great Ron Carter, and probably starting first with Paul Chambers, because when I was a teenager, I wanted to be Paul Chambers when I grew up, and then Ron Carter came into the picture, and then James Jamerson, Motown.
Hmm.
So that's the music that I heard from a kid with those three. But then I realized when I started looking at album covers later that one of my mentors, Milt Hinton, played on a lot of Sam Cooke records. So I had that Red Calendar,
Hmm.
played on a lot of Sam. So I had that sound, their sound of the bass in my ear when I started. So I had a phase where I discovered people like Oscar Pettiford and Sam Jones and the great Ray Brown. And I got mentored by Milt Hinton, who had a profound influence on me, which led me to go back and study the whole history of the bass. And then kind of modern players like, in the 60s, like Dave Holland. And I would have to say Robert Hurst, who's from Detroit, is a big influence. And then I try to let, newer people, maybe some that's younger than me, like Christian McBride, is certainly a big influence on me. I'm constantly trying to go back and examine, younger players that's playing. I had a student named Ben Williams who was an
Oh yeah.
influence on me because, you hear a lot of times as a teacher and you're a professor, sometimes you have talented students and they come up with stuff that you're not thinking about. So I steal from everybody. The younger
Mhm.
cats, I steal from my students. I see them do something, I'll give them an A2, and they'll have a different way of approaching it. So I steal from everybody. Everybody that play my instrument, whether they play an electric bass, upright bass. Sometimes I have friends like you that play multiple instruments. I saw a clip of you playing electric bass. I stole stuff from you.
Oh
Trying to
goodness
model it. I
gracious.
mean, yeah, I saw you fingering some A2. I
Right.
was like, dang, I never thought about it. I said, he a sax player, so he's looking at this. And I was checking out your concept of fingering. It looked like you were playing the saxophone. So then that changed I saw that like a month ago, but it changed the way I thought about fingering. Because then I started thinking about like, if I was a saxophone player, so that's what mindset it put me in. If I was a saxophone player, how would I finger this? That's what you gave me. So everybody, to intellectual ideas, to everything. If I talk to you and you say something profound, I put that in it changes the way I think. So I'm like that type of person. I'm a student of everybody's, whether it's a kid or my wife or my family or, people I run into. I'm always trying to discover something new. So I'm influenced by everything and everyone.
Uh, you you know I was thinking. Uh, it must have been maybe 2002,
Hmm.
sometime in that time period. So I was still living in Kalamazoo. It was before I took the job at Ohio State, and I had a regular Friday night gig,
I remember that.
and once a month, uh, the budget was I had a bigger budget, and I called you and had you come and play with my quartet at this restaurant called 211. I don't even know if they do music in that place anymore. Um, but that room was interesting because you go in the front door and you go downstairs into the restaurant, and it was like a an office building that they put a restaurant in the middle of that office building, and so the ceilings were super high. It was like almost um, uh, like you could almost see the top of the entire building from inside being on the floor, and they're playing, and it was all brick and everything. And I had played, there a lot, um, and uh, when you came, um, you didn't have an amp,
Right.
and I was thinking to myself, man, I can half hear myself, if I'm not amplified playing saxophone, and I'm like, I wonder how this is gonna go. And you're like, no, no, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. And I was like, okay. So you started playing, and I could not believe that I could hear every note with crystal clarity better than I was able to hear any other bass player that I had booked there, and they were playing through amps.
Wow.
You know, because you just get such a huge sound, um, such a huge focus sound. And then I was asking you about your setup, like the space between the fingerboard and the strings, like how high this, because the way that the hugeness of the sound suggested to me that maybe there was more space between
Right.
the fingerboard and the strings. And you showed me how close your action was, and then you shared with me about Ray Brown.
Yeah.
You talked to me about that, and I just remember that really sticks out. Of course, I had a wonderful time playing with you, but that was one of the things that really stuck with me. Is how was this guy able to to fill this room? This is like impossible, playing that way. Um,
Well, when I first started playing, I didn't, because I would see everyone playing with a pickup.
Mm.
And so when I first started trying to produce sound, I was trying that way, and I didn't understand the physics of the bass, and
Hmm.
that you make sound and how to utilize my arm and fingers, right hand, left hand to create sound. And then of course I spent some time with Mule in the late '80s, like 1989 is when I met him. I was on a film score with Terrence Blanchard, and Milt was the principal bass of the section. So I got a chance to spend a week with him watching him produce sound. And so that really kind of changed my concept that you have to understand physics in order for you to produce sound on any instrument. And what had happened, the way I grew up watching people play, everybody had an amp and they had very close action. And it was really about not so much technique, but speed. And technique
Hmm.
and speed, technique has to do more with posture too. But it was really about being able to play fast because bassists thought you couldn't play fast. But one of the things that Bob Hurst and certainly Christian McBride brought to the scene is that you could have a big sound and understand the physics of creating the sound, yet be able to have velocity. And those are two different things. But a lot of people in the '60s, well '70s, equated speed with having an amplifier and low setup. But over time, I figured out how to play fast and do all of that, but also be able to still create acoustic sound. And since then, like now, in the maybe 10 years ago, I started using the amp just because every situation is not conducive to playing without it, because sometimes you get a sound person that doesn't know how to do it, and then
Right.
you end up finishing the gig and people come up to you and say, you look great, but I couldn't hear what you
Right.
played.
Right. Right. Right.
So I now, now I kind of use the amp, but I use it very little. I don't turn it up that loud. So I use it so that maybe through the house I'll use a mic and the amplifier and blend those two sounds. And then I also hanging out with Rufus Reed a couple years ago, I got now a blender where I can blend the sound of a mic and an amp, so I can get like a real rich acoustic sound still. But then I still utilize. I think about playing um, the bass like playing saxophone or the trumpet. It's still about air. So I have to breathe
Mm.
to play. I breathe when I'm playing. And without oxygen, your muscles constrict. So you have to think about, like I'm always asking horn players, like when you think about, creating sound. So I'm always fascinated by the physics of instruments and sound and things like that. So I'm always curious. And plus, I conduct a big band too. So I'm always asking pedagogical things about if I need to get. I'm aware of tonguing and things that bass players don't think about, but I think about articulation and all that the same way you all do. So I think the same syllable relationship to, and it really is important on a guitar or a bass or piano to think like that, because sometimes we overplay because we don't think about breathing. We play too. I played with somebody one time. They played a 32 bar phrase on the guitar. I mean, which is cool to be able to do that, but I'm like, damn, you got to breathe. You have to breathe to play an instrument.
Right.
So,
Yeah. A lot of my concept of the role of the bass, um, it comes from folks like yourself and Peter Dominguez and a lot of these great bass players that I was blessed to be able to play with when I was a kid. And it's interesting when I decided that I wanted to start playing bass, um, which was like in '05. Um, I just uh, I decided to do that because I had always been hearing bass lines in my head.
yeah.
I was always hearing that, and so I just finally wanted to pick up the instrument that a lot of that sound was coming from. Um, uh, and I was thinking about this too. Uh, I have greatly benefited uh, from you also in that you have produced some tremendous students that I
Oh yeah.
have that I've played with. Folks like Dave Rosin and
Oh
uh,
yeah.
George Delancey.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, folks like Ben Williams.
Hmm.
These kind of players, and anyone that you've taught, there's a. I mean, they still sound like them, but I can tell who they. When I first heard George play, I played a gig with him in January. It was the first gig I had with him,
Hmm.
and as soon as I heard him start playing, I knew who he had studied with. Um, and so that's great. So as when I was a kid and growing up, I had a lot of time to practice.
Yeah.
And the older I get, and the more responsibilities that I have, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm an administrator um, at a couple different institutions, and then all the stuff that we have to do to be relevant online and everything,
Yeah.
producing videos and all that kind of stuff. And so what happens is it starts to kind of limit the amount of time that I have to practice. And also when I was young, there are certain things that I practiced, often that I don't practice anymore, or if I do practice them, it's sort of every once in a while. I'm
Right.
trying to get to. So it's if I'm trying to climb to the top of the mountain, it's hard to do that if you keep going back to the bottom of the mountain.
Right.
Because it's hard to cover ground. My question for you is, what do you practice, and what is your perspective on sort of maximizing your practice time?
You know what? That's a great question. And can I, before I jump into what to practice, I want to tell you before I forget is that your four finger concept on the bass. I'm trying to learn that now with your right hand. So that's what when I was saying that you were playing like a saxophone, not just your left hand, but also how you approach the right hand is on my mind. That's been on my mind for a while. So I just want you to know that.
Thank you,
So
man.
next, when I talk to you next year, I'm gonna have my four finger concept together. But so when I first started playing in Roy Hargrove's band, I used to practice 4 or 5 hours a day, and so that was like major scales. I had like practice. I just first started practicing Bach preludes. I mean Bach. What is it? The cello suites.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I had like 4 or 5 hours a day to practice. And then when I got in this band, I didn't really have as much time, and didn't practice. I think really in that 4 years as much as I was really practicing before that because we were on the road traveling every day, playing late into the night, getting up the next morning, catching trains to Europe, and I kind of my practicing kind of like was very limited, I think. And then when I left the band, I started teaching private students as a part of income stream because I was freelancing and I had a lot of time at home. So and this was just before I started teaching at Michigan State and U of M. I was just had people coming over my house for lessons, and I really needed to get back to fundamentals because with that 4 years of not really practicing, I had like bad technical habits that I had developed. Um, I played out of tune and I didn't realize it, but when you start making recordings all the time, you hear yourself on a recording like, man, I'm out of tune. Or, technical issues dealing with the height of the strings and all that. So what I started doing is I started practicing one key a day.
Hmm.
And I've continued that. And I grew more, I would say, from that point to now by practicing everything in one key a day. So if I do a scale, I do all my scales in the key of C. I do play all the tunes that I play that day in the key of C. So I practice in 12 day cycles. So I might have 1 or 2 tunes that I work on over 12 days. And I play that over the 12 days, I play that one tune in 12 keys. I'll play all my scales in etudes and I transpose every etude in 12 keys.
Mm.
And so that's how I maintain, because it takes me like 2 hours to practice. I could put in 2 hours. Sometimes I found too is that if my list is too long, then I don't practice, because it's
Oh,
like,
that's
man,
good.
I don't really have like 3 4 hours to practice no more. But I actually can practice an hour, and I actually can practice 2 hours. And I also like schedule, if I'm in a shedding mode, I might say I'm going to practice at this on this day at this time. So I kind of like schedule it, just like you schedule a meeting or schedule. And one day it might be I might be practicing at 10 and I might be practicing at 4, or it might be 10 at night. So I just kind of like schedule it, and then I actually play everything in one key. And so if I'm doing a Bach piece, I'll play that, and I'll pick short stuff that I can actually accomplish. So that, and then if I'm like really in the shed, and that's usually summertime, then I do like a regular practice routine, working on things. But during the school year, this is what I could do. And some days I might not get to 2 hours. I might only have 30 minutes to warm up. But I make sure that I practice every day. But I only play two instruments. I play, piano, and I play bass. So if I had 4 or 5 instruments, that would be much more of a challenge. But I also admire people who play multiple instruments. And I'm thinking about, getting into, I want to play saxophone before it's my time. Before my time's up, I want to learn saxophone. I want to learn trombone and trumpet.
Something maybe we could do is maybe you could give me some bass lessons. I could give you some saxophone lessons.
That sounds like a deal.
Yeah,
Deal.
yeah. I owned an acoustic bass for a while, and I learned all my major scales, 2 octaves with all the right fingerings.
Oh, wow.
And then I was like, I'm not going to do this. and I I sold it. I don't even own an acoustic bass anymore. I kind of
We
wish
could
I
hook
didn't
you
do
up. We
that.
could hook you up. We could hook you up.
Hey, hey, sweet. I think I probably have a hey, we could trade.
Yeah.
I'm sure I have an extra saxophone I could send your way.
We'll work it out. We'll work it out.
Sweet. Um, so anytime I've been around you, anytime I've had conversations with other folks that know you, they talk about how much of a family man you are. And in fact, when we were trying to schedule this interview, and I was trying to work around my family's schedule,
Yeah.
um, it was very clear to me that uh, you spending regular time with your family is like of the utmost importance, which I have a lot of respect for. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, fortunately for me, I had my first kid. I was like 18 years old. So I started very early, and I actually had, for me, that's a priority, and sometimes in life it's been more of a challenge because I'm touring and traveling, and making that time for, my wife is included in my family, who's my best friend. Um, so trying to make that time, I'm not one of those musicians that even when I'm on the road, I talk to my wife every day, multiple times a day. And so that's been a priority for me. And also too, like when I was a young musician, before I started traveling on the road a lot, I was the caretaker of the kids. So I had 3 kids before I hit the road. Like Roy Hargrove was, I toured with Terrence Blanchard, Donald Harrison Quintet, and we worked a little bit. We weren't on the road all the time. But when I started with Roy, we were working a lot. And I was really depressed for a long time because I spent pretty much all day, every day with my kids before that. And they were always with me everywhere, whether if I had an outdoor gig, you probably remember seeing my kids. And
Oh
most
yeah.
of those kids are like in their late 20s and early 30s now. And and then I have a group, with my daughter Raquel. She's a vocalist in my group. We record together. My son Langston is an artist. He does artwork for me, and my daughter Rosalind does all my social media. So we still work together and quite active, and it's still a family thing.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for that. It is not. I mean, you started off the interview talking about how things were different as far as just families and having two parents in the household and all of that. And I've been blessed to have that. My parents are still together,
Oh yeah.
and it just it's been profound. Just the kind of man my father is,
Yeah.
and the kind of person that I'm trying to be because of that kind of example. So
Yeah, I always, Uncle G, Randy Gillespie always said, man, if his comment about your dad was always if half the fathers would spend half the time, the kind of time that he saw your father spend with you, and your father just didn't have one kid.
right,
So that, and you got a sister that's a doctor, and you got, I've been keeping people who are very successful in your family, and that's really your mother and father. They put a lot of time into you all.
yeah. So let me ask you about the future.
Sure.
So um, uh, so how do you see yourself in the future? And what goals do you have, or unfinished projects that you're working on? And maybe even you could talk about some areas of personal growth, maybe stuff that's not even related to music at all, just some stuff uh, that you're thinking about.
Well, now my life, for those who don't know, my life is that I am the artistic director of two programs. I run a jazz orchestra called the Jazz Orchestra Dr. Phillips, that's in Orlando, Florida. And so I have uh, something like 5 cycles of concerts down there. We do each of the concerts 3 times, and most of them are theme concerts. So I do that several times a year. Then I have a group called the Gathering Orchestra in Detroit, which is a fellowship program of young musicians, primarily folks that are in institutions in Michigan school. So college age folks is 18 to 30-year-olds. And so I run that, and we have 4 to 5 cycles of that. And we
Mm-hmm.
do each one of those concerts once a year, and we're supposed to tour Russia sometime soon. And then, in addition to that, I have my own sextet with my daughter, and I tour and play with that group as well. I do a little. I don't do as much freelancing anymore because I'm committed to kind of doing my own projects now. And but mostly what I do with other people is I'm still recording. So I'll do something like from 2 to 20 recordings depending on who's calling that year. So a lot of recording projects. Then I also committed to when I was 50 doing 5 projects to commemorate my 50th year. So I have 3 of those. 2 of them that's been released. One called that's an Ellington project called All Too Soon. Then did a collaboration project with Greg Hill, who's a composer from Lansing. So we did a record together. And then I have one that's coming out that I wrote that's dedicated to my family, all tunes I wrote for my kids and my wife, called Love Letter. Then I have a solo bass project that's coming out, and then another sextet record that will either be Basie or Ellington. And so it's pretty busy. And I'm a director of jazz studies at Michigan State. And so with all of that going, it's a lot of busy. It requires me to be very like disciplined and sleep at night, and practice, and write music and do all the things, and then also get help when I need help. So that's the other thing. I'm very very collaborative, more collaborative now, and I don't try to do everything. Future wise, when I retire, which will be a few years from now, I'm not sure when. But when I retire from university, I'm not going to do that my whole life. But when that point comes, my goal is to be on the road with me and my wife and my band full time. And so that's kind of my dream. I'm working towards building up my name as a leader, and that's primarily why I mostly do projects that I'm the leader of, so that when that time comes, I could spend most of my time traveling with my group and teaching, maybe like more seminar based. I'm inspired now by teaching on the web, the possibilities of reaching more people, um, and then being a resource for people. And part of it too, also, I'm a mentor. I believe, I was put on earth to mentor 1,000 people, and those 1,000 people mentor their 1,000, and they meant their 1,000 mentor their 1,000, and then we changed the world through jazz.
Yes, I remember you talking about the mentorship piece, even back, when we played in Kalamazoo together, and um, yeah. So I mean, so is there anything that you'd like to mention that that I didn't ask you, or is there a uh, if is there a an upcoming project? I know a bunch of stuff has been canceled and paused and everything, but is there something upcoming that you want to tell the audience about?
Well, the number one thing is I have a CD that will be coming out, and I'm not sure yet what vehicle that I'm going to release the CD. I thought about just giving it away online, putting it on YouTube, but the record is dedicated to my family. It's called Love Letter, and that record will be out soon. I'm not look. It could be YouTube. It could be just online free. You know, um, and so that's the next thing coming up. And the next concert I have is a tribute to Miles at the Dr. Phillips Center in May. But so many things are
Yeah.
being canceled, and there's a lock in or shut in or whatever we're calling it in Michigan until June now.
Oh man.
So
Yeah, in Ohio, it got extended to at least the end of April, so May 1st.
yeah,
Um, but I think it's going to get extended beyond that. Um, likely. But yeah, it's strange times. I like what you were saying about being being inspired by the technology.
oh yeah,
The possibility of reaching more folks. You don't have to be within arm's reach of someone to be able to reach out and can reach a lot more people and all that. And then of course, what's happening at all these universities about with teaching, uh, teaching students virtually, using this platform, the Zoom platform, to teach students in particular. Um, getting comfortable with that. A lot of faculty members that have been fighting against technology for a long time now. It's kind of like now it's the time to get that together. I've wanted to interview you for a long time,
no, I appreciate it.
but you're busy, and so am I, right? Uh, but not right now, right?
Well,
Everybody's
I mean, I think
schedule
I
opened
think
up.
I think like I'm looking at it like I was really burnt out. And I appreciate what you're saying about technology. I didn't grow up with that, and I was against it for a long time. And really, about 10 years ago, I got into it. I had a graduate student who was like, "If you build your website, you'll get more gigs." And I was old school, and he was right. And it
Right.
sort of like pushed me into utilizing technology more, even in as a tool for teaching.
Right.
Just the amount of information. Sometimes I'll go in and I'm teaching a class, and I'll mention a video online, and my students are like, it messes their head up of my encyclopedic knowledge of videos that's on YouTube.
Mm.
Because one kid asked me like, "Was YouTube out when you were growing up?" I said, no, it started. I was already an adult. Just because once I got into it and I saw the possibilities of what you could do, that
Right.
just changed my whole outlook on how I thought about information. Because I'm one of those LP guys going to the library because that's what we did. But when I discovered that I had a library on my phone, or I got at my fingertips. If I got an iPod and I got Wi-Fi, I'm walking around with millions of years of knowledge in a phone.
Yeah.
I can go. If I need to, think about what a word means, I can, Google the word, or it changed my whole look of education. And the other thing, I'm still busy. It's just a different kind of busy.
Right.
But also too, like I was going to say, I was really burnt out leading up to this point and really tired. And I was at the point where I didn't really know how it was going to go on. But I had to catch flights, and I had to teach school and go to meetings and do planning and all that. but I was like really physically, spiritually, mentally burnt out coming into this pandemic. And when it happened, um, it provided for me the good part of it. The bad part of it is that we're in a pandemic. The good part of it is that it afforded me more time to spend with my family and to spend, fellowshipping with God. And it afforded me more time to just be reflective. And I'm still busy, but I have more time. Like I realized that I spent very little time in my home. And so I'm really looking at this. And every night, I'm praying and I'm sending out gospel music to people. I sent out a post on YouTube that says prayer music.
Yeah, I saw. I've seen it. Well, I've been paying more attention to your social media as of late, but the last couple in a row I noticed, in particular, and yeah, very very cool.
But my last point is that this has inspired me to want to change the way I live my life, and really having time, more time, and some things I may not be able to do in the future just because I don't want to be that busy where I'm mentally, spiritually, and physically exhausted all the time.
Hmm. Well, and on that note, I just want to say again, I so appreciate your time and your energy towards this interview. And I and I'm gonna hold you to that trade for lessons.
We'll hook that up. I need it. I want to be Dexter Gordon, man. So
That's my man. All right, I'll see you later, Rodney. You have a good
talk to
one.
you. Thank you,
God bless
Dr.
you.
Wallace. All
All right, now.
right.